Hello, I'm Jennifer Rooks, and this is Maine Watch. In November, voters in 2 states, Colorado and Washington, approved measures to legalize marijuana for recreational use. Supporters say it's a big first step to putting drug dealers out of business. And it's a step that State Representative Diane Russell believes Maine should take. Russell is sponsoring a bill which would legalize the sale of marijuana by licensed retailers to anyone 21 or older. She says legalization will get drug dealers off the street, generate tax revenue, and help law enforcement officials control a problem that has been out of control for decades. Susan Kimball has more on the proposed legislation and opposition to it.
When Denny Gallaudet, now retired from education, was the superintendent of schools in the town of Richmond, he and the local police chief worked hard to keep drugs out of schools. But it was a losing battle, he says, once students left the school grounds.
The chief and I would talk about the fact that the drugs were everywhere in the town. So what were we really doing? And this came home to me when we started to get the drug use, substance abuse state surveys, and we were finding that the kids in our schools and statewide were using cigarettes less than they were smoking marijuana.
Gallaudet is convinced that there's a better way to keep marijuana out of the hands of kids, and that State Representative Diane Russell has the answer. Legalize the drug for recreational use by adults and regulate it heavily.
When was the last time you heard of a drug dealer carting a kid? If you really want to get this out of the hands of kids, you have to have control over the market.
David Boyer of the Marijuana Policy Project agrees.
Prohibition doesn't work. You go to any high school campus and ask a kid what's easier to get, marijuana or alcohol, and they'll say marijuana. And that's precisely because alcohol is regulated.
Under Russell's bill, anyone 21 or older could possess up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana purchased from a licensed retailer. She estimates this plan will generate more than $13 million a year in tax revenue and put pot dealers in Maine out of business.
But some say it's premature for states to consider legalizing marijuana for one simple reason. The use of the drug is still prohibited under federal law.
State Representative and former Cumberland County Sheriff Mark Dion says this is an issue that has to be addressed from the top down.
It's an easy win to say I support legalizing marijuana. The harder work is to revisit the entire body of drug law at the federal level and see if we can get better outcomes. Right now, our containment policy, our incarceration policy are expensive, and they haven't produced the results we were looking for. We have little or no resources for those who become addicted, and they become addicted no matter what the law says.
Dr. James Meyer has concerns about the proposal, too. He says efforts to legalize marijuana don't take into account research that shows the potentially devastating effect of allowing widespread use of the drug.
My major concern as a psychiatrist, and predominantly a child psychiatrist, is that for certain vulnerable kids, and often we don't know who they are, they don't know who they are ahead of time, heavy use of marijuana can lead to very serious lifelong consequences. We know it has a kindling effect on latent psychotic illnesses like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia.
Denny Gallaudet says that's why legalization should be accompanied by a vigorous effort to educate kids about the risks of marijuana use.
I don't agree with many people who say that it's harmless. I can't believe that. But to treat it as a crime seems to make it, in addition to not working, seems to impute more danger than is necessary to impute.
Diane Russell says the bottom line is that the war on drugs isn't working, and it's time to face that fact.
If you really want to protect kids, you have to look at whether or not marijuana prohibition has worked. And when 85% of high school seniors have consistently said since 1975 that they have easy access to marijuana, we have done nothing to get it out of their hands other than bury our heads in the sand.
If this measure makes it through the legislature, Mainers will have a chance to weigh in. The bill includes a provision that will send it to referendum. For Maine Watch, I'm Susan Kimball.
And joining me now to discuss this issue, Representative Diane Russell and Kennebec County Sheriff Randy Liberty, who is also president of the Maine Sheriff's Association. Thank you for both of you for being here. Representative Russell, you first introduced this bill a couple years ago. What has changed now, because it didn't go very far 2 years ago, that has made you think that this is the time to reintroduce it?
Well, you hit on it a little earlier, and that is that Washington State and Colorado passed it through a ballot referendum just in November. And since that time, the tides have really changed. And I think for a lot of folks, the question of whether to legalize or not has largely started to be answered. The question is what we're going to do to regulate it. What are we going to do to make sure that this stays out of the hands of kids and that it's only in the hands of responsible adults and sold through licensed ethical business owners? Right now, we have absolutely no control over the market. We have no idea where it is, how much THC level is in it. We don't have an opportunity to weigh in on that. And I think that this is the way to make sure that the state has control over it, the state has an opportunity to license those folks, and that we have ethical business owners who are responsible and contributing to society, who are overseeing it and not necessarily allowing the drug dealers to have the corner of the market, so to speak.
Sheriff Liberty, most experts agree the war on drugs isn't working. Why not take this different turn? Why not say, okay, we're going to legalize it and control it?
I've spent 30 years in this industry, and much of what I've done is drug enforcement, drug education, and in the last decade I've done a bunch of drug rehabilitation in the correctional facility. And my take on it is that it's difficult to say that to regulate it would diminish the amount of marijuana in the community. I think that it's maybe misguided or misunderstanding to think to regulate it would somehow control it better, because marijuana can be grown anywhere. And if you deregulate it and suppose that people aren't going to grow it, I think you're wrong. It'll continue to be grown in homes and grown outside and in the wooded areas and continue not to be taxed and regulated, and I'm not sure that that's the answer.
And do you see this as an issue of making it more difficult to figure out who's selling to children and who's selling to responsible adults? Or
the fact of the matter is most drug enforcement agents in the state of Maine, I think nationally, are focusing on opiates now. There's a small percentage of us that spend much time with marijuana, and quite frankly, as we investigate, I have 3 dedicated investigators looking at drug enforcement all the time, and it's mostly opiates now. If we stumble on a trafficker, multiple pounds, or a grower, we'll spend some time with them and work it. But an important piece of this is I see a whole lot of damage that's done to folks with substance abuse. I used to teach in the schools, and I did a bunch of enforcement. But I see it now in the jails, and many people say that it's a gateway drug. They started using marijuana, and that kind of escalated to other things. Or they're heavy marijuana users, and they lack motivation, have anxiety issues, and it's a problem. It's not a harmless drug.
Representative Russell, it seems like it would be a huge undertaking to set up a system to regulate and monitor the sale of marijuana. As Sheriff Liberty mentioned, it's a plant, you can grow it, so it's not something that would always be bought and sold. How would this work?
Well, interesting enough, prohibition of alcohol started in the city that I represent, Portland, Maine, thanks to Neil Dow. And there was a constitutional amendment to prohibit alcohol. And the same sort of thing occurred. We saw a black market develop. We saw people like Al Capone come to fruition. And ultimately, the same questions were asked about ending that prohibition. It seemed like a daunting task, but we managed to do it. In fact, I serve on the Veterans and Legal Affairs Committee that oversees alcohol regulation now. And it's never a perfect science, but when you regulate, you actually know where the product is. And we did manage to eliminate the underground alcohol trade. Now, Mr. Liberty here mentioned that you'll still be able to grow marijuana, you'll still be able to do all of these things, but at the end of the day, you can still do that with alcohol. You can still produce alcohol in your home. You can produce beer, you can produce wine, you can produce spirits under a certain amount. And we're still finding that people still go to the store, they still go to their licensed retailer to purchase it. Not everybody is going to want to grow a plant. For example, I have a very difficult time growing tomatoes. I have to actually go to the grocery store to buy tomatoes. But I could still grow them. I choose not to. And I think you're going to find that people are going to choose to go to a licensed retailer, and they're going to choose to do it the responsible way.
Sheriff Liberty, one of the points that supporters of marijuana legislation have made for years, not just in sort of the recent push, is that our jails are filled with people who are nonviolent offenders in for drug-related charges. Is that what your experience is? And wouldn't this help free up some space in the jails?
No, a very small population is related to marijuana use. Anyone that's in the facility may be there for trafficking, but it's very small numbers. The issues now are opiates, and that's what we're focusing our efforts on. But a very small number of folks are in the facility for trafficking.
Okay. Representative Russell, Colorado and Washington have asked the U.S. Department of Justice for guidance because marijuana is illegal on the federal level, and so their laws now conflict with the federal laws. Former Sheriff Dion made that point. So how would Maine, especially without guidance from DOJ, how would Maine go forward if we were to pass this kind of legislation?
It's a great question. Currently, Maine statute is already out of compliance with federal law. We have a medical marijuana regulatory system here in the state. We have had one for some time. It has been, in 2009, we passed an expansion of medical marijuana to allow for dispensaries. Maine already regulates marijuana in the medical community. We've done it responsibly, we've done it conservatively, and at each opportunity to expand access to marijuana, folks came out and said the sky was going to fall, and it didn't. In fact, Maine has been a real solid example and case study of how you can do it right. So the question of whether or not we're in conflict with federal statute has already been answered, and it was answered by the people of Maine through referenda. And that's precisely why I think it's important that this bill go to the people of Maine. I think it's important for lawmakers to get ahead of the issue. The legalization issue is coming to our state, whether people like it or not, and my job as a lawmaker is to be prepared for that. I want to make sure that we take into account the best interests of the broadest array of people, create a regulatory infrastructure that makes sense, that addresses the concerns of law enforcement, that addresses the concerns of substance abuse counselors, that addresses the concerns of parents, and that bill goes to the people for ratification and for vote.
Sheriff Liberty, I want to return to something you mentioned earlier, the idea of marijuana as a gateway drug. We often hear the phrase that marijuana today isn't your parents' marijuana. In your years in law enforcement, what is the difference in marijuana? You said 20 years. What kind of drug were we dealing with 20 years ago, and what are we dealing with today?
Sure, it's been 30 years, but the THC content is much higher. And due to hybrid, cultivation techniques, it's a much more potent marijuana. And I believe that if we legalize marijuana, that they'll be much more available. I think that'll just do the inverse of what the intent is. I think there'll be much more use by juveniles. I think we send them a social message that's okay, and I think that it just create more problems.
How much is out there now? I know the Kennebec County Sheriff's Department had a bust just earlier this week. I mean, is that pretty typical or unusual?
100 is a medium-sized grow.
100
plants.
Okay.
Yeah, 100 plants, maybe 1.5 pounds of marijuana. And this individual had half of his home converted into a marijuana grow. I've had as many as 700 in the house before. Just a profit-making endeavor, and it had very little to do with personal use.
And in this case, and in most cases, where is this being sold? Just locally, or is there?
Locally, yeah, just local distribution.
How much of it is being trafficked from, say, Mexico, where we hear about so much of the drug violence?
That's referred to as commercial marijuana, and it's a lower grade. The higher quality marijuana is grown locally, actually. It's more expensive. Yeah.
Representative Russell, what about the point that Dr. Meyer made in Susan's Field piece, that it's very hard, especially with young people, to tell who are the young people who are going to have a really bad reaction to marijuana? And if we give what Sheriff Liberty, I think, sort of referred to as a tacit approval of this drug, how can we not know we're not going to end up with more people with serious mental health issues?
Well, I think Denny Gallaudet really hit the nail on the head, and that is that we need more public education around this. I think we have a lot of public education saying that alcohol for minors is not good. It's not good for you. And I think that we should be doing the same kind of awareness around marijuana. This bill is only legalizing it for people who are over the age of 21. It's the same way we're doing it for alcohol. So I think that this does need to be accompanied with a public awareness campaign. I think that we need to be focused on the fact that there is a difference between adults, responsible adults, and their ability to make their own decision. I don't disagree with the psychiatrist around the effects on young people. I really don't. I just think that we have learned that 85% of high school seniors are saying that they have access to it.
Okay, and I just want to ask you, Sheriff Liberty, very quickly, do you feel as though the other sheriffs that you represent as president of the association agree with you that
Very
this is
consistently.
not the time? All
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Well, Sheriff Randall Liberty and Representative Diane Russell, thank you so much for being here on Maine Watch.
Glad to be here.